How did the digital moguls, tech moguls, become such tyrannical monsters? How did the people who positioned themselves to be the great enemies of the dictatorial state, of, you may say, Big Brother of 1984, how did they become Big Brother? How did they become the, you can call it, Big Brotherhood of 6 or 10 guys who essentially want to control, manipulate, regulate, censor, suppress, and destroy? I think back to that wonderfully liberating Apple commercial of 1984, which talked about 1984, talked about Orwell, and talked about fighting against Big Brother. Here's a little glimpse of it.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Now, this commercial is fascinating, and if you watch the whole thing, which you can online, you'll see that they start off with the whole concept of the big state. You've got Big Brother himself, and Big Brother's talking about everyone having, quote, one will, the unification of thoughts. Big Brother is talking about, quote, a garden of pure ideology. Everybody is locked into the same ideology. And then what happens? You basically see a young woman running up to the screen and smashing it with a hammer. And then you have these liberating words. Apple will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. Talk about false promises. We are moving toward 1984, and guess what? These very tech moguls are taking us there. They are the face of Big Brother. They are Big Brother. So it makes you begin to think about, how did people who were, harmless nerds and little bohemians and people who liked alternative food and yoga and thought of themselves as rebelling against the state, how did they become these monsters? What happened to them? What happened to that hippie sensibility, that bohemian love of freedom, that sense of wanting to be left alone and do your own thing? I think the answer to this can be found, well, in two things. One is in the movie Revenge of the Nerds, a movie about a bunch of misfits and, I would say, uncool cats who decide to strike back against all the cool people and have their revenge for all the injuries that have been foisted on them. The philosopher Nietzsche, my second source, calls this ressentiment, resentment. And for Nietzsche, ressentiment is more than resentment. It is this kind of gnawing hatred that grows in your soul that makes you want to avenge yourself. It creates a deep sense of injury, of victimization, and this, Nietzsche says, can take terrible and tyrannical forms. By the way, Adolf Hitler was a bohemian. I discussed this in my book, The Big Lie. Hitler came of age in the Schwabing bohemian neighborhoods around Munich. Remember, Hitler was an artist. He was a painter. He hung out with these guys. But he had this deep sense of injury and grievance directed against the Jews. I have a scene in the movie Death of a Nation where you see Hitler taking his revenge, striking out in this case against one of his rivals, Ernst Röhm, who was the head of the brown shirts. Here it is.
Some progressives try to portray Hitler as a right-winger by insisting he was anti-gay. But Hitler knew that the brown shirt leader, Ernst Röhm, was a notorious homosexual, as were many other brown shirts. When Hitler showed up to arrest Röhm, he encountered a remarkable scene.
Allmannsle! Röhm, Sie sind verhaftet! Sie sind ein Verräter!
Röhm publicly suggested that he, not Hitler, was the true leader of the Nazi Party.
Hey, Jünge!
When Heinrich Himmler urged Hitler to purge the gay brown shirts out of the Nazi movement, Hitler refused.
Some of this, of course, is in German, but I'll interpret it for you. Basically, Hitler comes to arrest Rome and he finds himself in the middle of a kind of an orgy. Why? Because these brown shirts were themselves bohemians. It was all part of this bohemian culture, but a bohemian culture suffused with resentment. Let's come back to Revenge of the Nerds, because if you look at these tech moguls and you go into their backgrounds, I've looked at some of their high school pictures. These guys were total misfits. Even Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs was a loner. According to Walter Isaacson in his very fine biography of Jobs, Jobs was regularly bullied in school. He became a kind of a hermit, and he'd go hang out in a garage and basically play on the computer, play on little machines, work on technology, which was his refuge from humanity. And this is true of all these other guys, Dorsey and Zuckerberg, nerds to the core. And I'm sure that as nerds, they were treated as nerds, and high school and middle school even can be really cruel. People look down on you. And so they had all these little injuries that they gathered because they were seen as uncool and they were seen as freaks. Get away from me. And they nursed their grievances. But see, here's the problem. When you nurse your grievances, you resolve, I'm going to get those people one day. When I get strong and powerful, I'll have my revenge. But see, the problem is when you get older, all those people are gone. All those frat boys and sorority girls and members of exclusive clubs and pom-pom girls and cheerleaders and football stars and big man on campus, all those people have gone on with their lives. There's no one to get, so to speak. And so you have to displace your anger onto something else. And you know what they displace it on? Americana. Because they identify fraternities and sororities and football games with America. And so later on, they package this resentment and then they displace it. Imagine, for example, a Trump rally. They go, oh, did you see the violent rhetoric that Trump used at the rally? I mean, it flashes their mind back to high school pep rallies. I mean, think of a nerd. What does a nerd do at a high school pep rally? He's not welcome. The best he can do is operate the audio-visual equipment. He's outside the rally. And so you look at Trump, Trump's violent rhetoric reminds me of the time that Sally Clemson gave me a violent look and told me, get away, you freak. Or think about the time, for example, Trump's incendiary tweets remind me of the time that Roberto Rivera tripped me in 7th grade. What you're dealing with here are social misfits who have grown up, but they're still social misfits. And here's the irony. The social misfits are running social media. They're controlling our social lives. And if you listen to their testimony, their conversation, these are people ultimately living in a different zone. They don't relate to other people all that well, even now. And all this tyranny, all this censorship, all this desire for maniacal control comes out of nothing more than the fact that these people were treated badly when they were younger, and they're determined to strike back.